Good morning, everyone. Very excited to be here. It's always exciting to work in different countries and bring what you're passionate about to a different audience. If I look a little bit relieved to be here this morning, it's because Chris and I almost boarded the plane to Bucharest last night rather than Budapest. We were a little bit sort of caught up in our conversation and nearly got on the wrong plane. It would have been a long taxi ride this morning, I suspect, but great to be here and really looking forward to, as Nandi said, a special morning for you and for me, because all the time this is something that we're learning about, and every time I do one of these sessions, somebody says something, somebody asks a question, and it adds a little bit extra to all of the work that's gone on around this work on the Trusted Executive. And thank you to Nandi and Business Coach for hosting this session and inviting Chris and I to be with you this morning. So, I went to a session in London recently by a speaker called Ryan Avery, who's written a great book called Speaker Leader Champion, and he is the world's #1 professional speaker. And he said that when you start a session like this, or when you start a meeting in your businesses, and whenever you get up to start something, you need to add value in the first 60 seconds. Because these days, people want value quickly. So I think I'm on 59 seconds, so I better move very quickly and start adding some value. So, if I show you this diagram, how many of you have seen this diagram before? Yeah. So what 3 words do you think of when you see that diagram? Start with why. Thank you, Laura. So this is the work of Simon Sinek. In his book, Start With Why. His video clip where he explains this model in his TED Talk has been watched 34 million times now on YouTube. So if you do nothing else after this session today, watch Simon Sinek's talk on Start With Why. And Laura, what do you know about Start With Why? What's the message?
Because this is very important for the employees and for the other stakeholders to understand why, and after that you can announce for them then how and what to do.
Yeah, so Simon Sinek says, most of us when we introduce ourselves or our businesses, we talk about what we do and how we do it, rather than why we do what we do. And he said the problem is if you talk about what you do and how you do it, you tend to attract people who need what you have. You tend to create consumers. It's a transactional relationship. Whereas if you talk about why you do what you do, you tend to attract people who believe what you believe. You tend to create new believers. Then that's an emotional relationship. So this morning I'm looking for new believers. And there might be some believers in the room. So for me to look for new believers, I need to start with not telling you what I do and how I do it, but why do I do what I do? So why did I spend 5 years of my life researching trust at Aston Business School in the UK, and then writing this book, The Trusted Executive? And trust me, it's not to make money. Nobody makes money out of writing books. Laura can confirm that. Nobody makes money out of writing books, unless your name is J.K. Rowling, who in the UK has made a little bit of money out of writing books. But I don't think she started with the objective of making money. To write a book or to go on a journey like that, you need a slightly irrational, crazy drive. You need something that ignites the spark. That means you commit yourself to a venture that has a very indeterminate outcome. Because bear in mind, when I first opened the page to write the first page of this book, I didn't know that one day I was going to be stood in front of you in Budapest, engaging you on the topic. For all I know, this might have been interesting to me and interesting to nobody else in the world. So when you start a venture like that, you're always taking that type of a risk. So you need a very good why. So I'd just like to share with you my why around trust in terms of where it all started. And to do that, I have to go back 16 years to my last corporate role. So 16 years ago, I was 37. I was International Managing Director in an organisation called Logica. And Logica was a FTSE 100 UK-based organisation, computer software business, 40,000 people around the world. And I'd been in that job for 2 weeks. And on the Monday morning, I was walking down the corridor of Logica's head office in London, just next to Euston Station, on the 6th floor, where all the directors of Logica had their offices. And walking towards me that morning was a guy called Dr. Martin Reed, CBE. I can name him, because I'm in Budapest, I can name him, because there's likely to be a friend of his or a family connection of his in the room. But Dr. Martin Reed was walking towards me. He was the group chief executive of Logica at that time. He was my boss. And if there'd have been a door into the cleaning cupboard that I could have just gone and stood amongst the mops for a couple of minutes and let Martin pass, I would quite gladly have taken that option. Because Martin wasn't really one of those leaders that you wanted to have an ad hoc conversation with on a Monday morning in the corridor of power. But there was no door to the cleaning cupboard. So I knew this conversation was going to happen, and Martin came up to me and said, "How's it going, Blakey?" And I said, "Yeah, it's going good, Martin. Yesterday we'd signed the biggest deal we'd ever signed in the sector, £32 million outsourcing deal with Lotus Cars." And he said, "You think that's good, do you?" And I thought, here we go. And I wasn't sure whether it was naivety or bravery. I'd love to say it was bravery, but I'd only been in the job 2 weeks. So it was probably naivety. I decided to stand my ground. And I said to Martin, "Yes, Martin, I think it's great." And at that point, a finger came straight into my face, and I heard a voice booming in my head that said, "You know your problem, Blakey." And I thought, no, but I'm clearly about to be unveiled of a lifetime's ignorance in that department. "You're too effing nice." And he walked off. And I'm stood there in a 21st century corridor, FTSE 100 business, thinking, my biggest problem is I'm too effing nice. And I'm thinking, too effing nice for what? Too effing nice to get to the top without cooking the books, as we say in the UK. Too effing nice to lead a team without bullying them or harassing them along the way. Too effing nice to deliver outstanding results in the vaguely psychopathic world of corporate life. But what I thank Martin for to this day is that in that moment when I stood there in a bit of a daze, he connected me with my why. Because something deep down here sort of rose up, gradually worked its way up and went, I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you, Martin. If it's the last thing I do on this planet, I'm going to show you that nice folk who can be trusted, can also deliver outstanding results. And every day that I got on a plane at some unearthly hour for the next 3 years to go to a distant part of the Logica empire, what motivated me was to prove that point, because I'd found my why. And that's the power of finding your why. And so for me, that why was to prove the point that Charles Green, another author on trust, has said. Charles Green has said that what the world needs right now are leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than leaders who trust in power. So what the world needs right now are leaders who rely on the power of trust rather than leaders who trust in power. And that was the point that I wanted to prove. And that's still the point that I want to prove. And I did prove that point in Logica, and it gave me great satisfaction to prove that point. And then I left Logica to become a coach because I wanted to find more believers. I wanted to find more brave leaders who wanted to take on that challenge, that risk of saying, I'm planting my flag here. And the flag I'm planting today is that I want to rely on the power of trust in my leadership, not trusting in power. And I cannot guarantee you that that will lead to success. But neither can I guarantee you that trusting in power will lead to success. What I can guarantee you is that if you rely on the power of trust, even if you fail, you will sleep better at night. Yep. And you might actually succeed. And wouldn't it be great to prove that point? If you're a believer, that will be touching you right now, and you will be saying, yeah, that's me. That's the tribe of leadership that I want to be part of. So, and even now as I tell that story, and I've told that story countless times, I can feel my blood pumping, I can feel my adrenaline going, because I've reconnected with this. I've reconnected with that why. So that's the power. That's what Simon Sinek, that's why he wrote this book, Start With Why. Do you know, so the first question today is, do you know what your why is? And do you know the story that connects you with it, and that every time you tell it, it gets you ready to do something that you care about, that you're passionate about, and therefore potentially to inspire other people to do the same, to find new believers in whatever it is that happens to be your passion and your cause. My passion, my cause, is this word, trust. It's not everybody's passion, but it is some people's passion. And if you happen to, by 1 o'clock today, if you happen to be one of the people that says, yep, that's me, that's where I want to put my flag of leadership, I want to help others plant the flag in that place, I want to rely on the power of trust, then you're in the right place, and we're going to go on a very interesting journey together. And if you're not, then it's not your why. And I'm not here to force anybody to adopt that stance, but I am here to invite you to explore it, to think about it, and to make a conscious choice. Because I think as leaders, we are making that choice every day of the week in the work that we do. And we have a responsibility to make that choice consciously, rather than just blindly following the path that has been given for us to follow. Are you with me? Great. So, that's my why. But once you've talked about your why, it's also useful to talk about what are we going to do and how are we going to do it. So, for those of us that like an agenda, then I'm going to tell you where we're going on this journey this morning together with trust. So we are going to go on a journey together, the journey of trust. And the journey of trust is going to have 4 stages this morning. How many of you have ever wondered why Donald Trump is in the White House? There are many commentators out there who say one of the main reasons why Donald Trump is in the White House is because we have a trust crisis raging in a lot of our institutional lives, whether it be in politics, media, business, non-governmental organizations. That there is a trust crisis raging out there in the streets of Budapest. And that we as leaders need to understand what is going on in the minds of the consumers and the voters and the people who work for us. We need to understand the context in which our business is operating, because if this trust crisis is raging out there in society as a whole, we're sucking it in through the front door of our businesses every day of the week. And our suppliers, our customers, our partners, their mindset and their attitude towards us as leaders, and whether they trust us or not, if that's shifting, we need to be aware of that, because it has an impact on how we might lead. So the first part of the journey today, we're in the plane, we're going to start at 30,000 feet. We're at the big picture. We're at the big picture level with trust. What is going on in the big picture of trust? So I'll spend a bit of time talking about that big picture. And where I want to get to with that, by the end of that stage, is this phrase that when the room gets darker, it's an opportunity for your own light to shine brighter. So the opportunity for businesses, for brands, and many of you in this room today are representing some fantastic brands. And the opportunity for you as leaders and for brands is that when the room gets darker, it's an opportunity for your own light to shine brighter. If everybody else is losing trust, if there are brands out there losing trust and leaders losing trust, it's an opportunity to seize competitive advantage by becoming known to be trusted and a high trust leader, a high trust brand. So that's the opportunity that the trust crisis represents for us. Second stage of the journey this morning is going to be about, okay, if there is a trust crisis, what is the impact of that on the leadership mindset? Why have we got to where we are now in the leadership cycle? What are the factors that led to that? And what mindset and paradigm of leadership do we now need to take forward? And that's really why I'll be looking at this choice between either trust and empower, which is where we have been with most of our leadership models, to relying on the power of trust, where the gamble is that maybe that's where the world of leadership is heading. The gamble is that it's heading that way. Leaders anticipate, managers manage. So if we're leaders, we're anticipating where is it going in the future. That's why it's a gamble. I cannot guarantee you that in 5 years' time, everybody in Hungary will be relying on the power of trust. But I can, based on my research, make a good probability assessment of the direction it's heading in, that more people will be relying on the power of trust. But you as leaders have to make your choice and decide, am I part of that new paradigm, or do I actually think it's not going to happen and therefore I might as well stick to the old paradigm? It's a gamble, but you're making a choice one way or the other. I just want to make sure you're thinking about that choice and making it consciously rather than just blindly. Third stage of the journey, models are not the truth. No model is the truth, but models are helpful in helping us communicate and break big topics down into smaller, manageable chunks. So I'm going to share a model of trust with you that's come out of this doctoral research at Aston Business School in the UK. It's a model of trust that has 3 pillars and 9 habits. The 3 pillars that we'll be talking about later are ability, integrity, and benevolence. So I'll look at those words and explore those words in more detail with you later. Ability, integrity, benevolence. And then we'll be looking at 3 habits under each pillar. Because my challenge as a coach, when I was coaching the believers around this topic, I would get to the point where people I was coaching, the CEOs I was coaching, were saying, yeah, John, I get it. I want to plant my flag in that place. I want to rely on the power of trust. How do I do that? How do I practically do that? And I didn't really have a good answer to that question at that time. And that's really why I wanted to build the model so that we can now talk about behavioral habits. If you want to go on this journey, what behaviors do you need to exhibit that will inspire people to trust you and that will inspire consumers to trust a brand? So that's the power, I say, the relevance of just us breaking this big word trust down into a manageable topics. And last stage of the journey is about you. Because ultimately, when you leave here today, are you going to choose to do something different? As a coach, as a practical business person, for me, that is the ultimate measure of the value of these sessions. If you find it entertaining, great. If you find it motivating, great. But are you going to do something different? And so I want to spend a bit of time at the end challenging you to think about the habits and to think about which habit of the 9 habits of trust could take your trust quotient to the next level. Which habit could make the most difference? Because you're not going to be able to work on 9 habits in parallel. You're far too busy to do that, and the people that you work with will be far too busy to do that. But if you can pick one and say, that's the one that right now in my business could make the most impact if I just start to move the needle a bit with that habit. So I'd like everybody at the end of the session to leave knowing what the one habit is and having an action that they're willing and committed to take to move that forward in the next week after you leave this session. And if we get to that, what for me a special morning, as Nandy described it, a special morning is that this bit of the journey is thought-provoking. I'd love you to have new thoughts here and to be agitated and challenged and inspired by those new thoughts. This part of the journey is action-provoking, that you're actually motivated by the end of it to take action. And if we can get both new thoughts, new actions, to me that will be a special experience to share together. And I will have new thoughts here, and I hope to have new actions there as well. It's part of the continuing to sort of refine and develop the work that we have with trust. Any questions about where we're going on the journey and what we're up to. We are going to have a break at 11, and I believe, Nandy, that chocolate is involved. So, we got chocolate right in the middle of the journey. We got chocolate. So that's, I think, a great sort of addition to the journey that we don't normally have in most of these sessions. So we'll look forward to that later. In terms of how we're going to travel, I've got a small number of slides. I've got some video clips. But I am relying upon you to help me in terms of your thoughts, your comments, your challenge, your feedback, and that we keep it as interactive as we can. At the end of the day, you are the experts on the Hungarian business context. I am not an expert on the Hungarian business context. You need to help me in terms of which bits of this might work around here and which bits of it might not work, because it's different. So I'm very interested to hear, and we'll create some opportunities for you to discuss amongst each other, but also to just share back, what's going on around here with trust. How does it work in Budapest and in Hungary? Because this needs to be applied, in your specific context. So, ready to get on the bus? Yeah, first stage of the journey, first leg of the journey. Let's talk about the trust crisis. So, I've name-checked Simon Sinek, one of my inspirations on this topic. I'll also name-check Stephen Covey, famous for his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Sold 16 million copies around the world. Fantastic book. And in that book, Stephen Covey says about trust is the glue of life. It's the most essential ingredient in effective communication. It's the foundational principle that holds all relationships. The relationships we're particularly looking at today are business relationships. But of course, trust shows up in all relationships. So if there's different relationships in your life and work where you think this work could make an impact, then apply it where you think it's going to help most for you, because it's a universal glue, trust, whether it's in our personal relationships or our business relationships. But we will be exploring this comment about trust being the glue of life. So when you rely on the power of trust, trust becomes the glue of life. When you trust in power, fear is the glue of life. So you can use fear as a glue, and you can use trust as a glue. And we'll explore a little bit about which is the stickiest glue, fear or trust. And we'll explore a little bit about why my view is that fear is not quite as sticky as it used to be, and trust is the only glue that's sticky enough to hold it all together in the future. So, that's a sound bite. It's all very well for Stephen Covey to say very motivational sound bites, but where are the facts? What are the statistics? Where is the evidence around trust and its impact on business outcomes? Because we need to justify this to the chief financial officer of our organizations, and they want numbers. So let's look at some numbers around trust. These are the outcomes of my own research at Aston Business School, surveying over 600 senior business leaders around asking them the question, how critical is trust to the following business outcomes? So 89% said trust is critical to attracting top talent. 91% said trust is critical to customer loyalty. 88% trust is critical to sustainable bottom line performance. And even 69% saying trust is critical to short-term profitability, where maybe we're tempted to trade off trust against other competing variables. So those are the results of my own research. These are the results of a guy called Dr. Paul Zak, who last year published an article in Harvard Business Review called The Neuroscience of Trust. Again, this is doctoral, academic, verified research. He was looking particularly at the impact of trust on the internal stakeholders of staff, employees. And what he found was that high trust cultures that are relying on the power of trust, 74% less stress, 13% less sick days, 50% more productivity, 76% more employee engagement. So that's a magic wand. I think if I could give you a magic wand today and say, all you need to do is wave this magic wand and you'll get these results, then I think these are the sorts of numbers and figures that should make us sit up and say, hang on a minute, if that's really what the potential of this tool is, maybe I should be looking at it and understanding it and working with it in more detail. And there is nobody out there, I mean, nobody has yet written a book titled, Trust is Dead. Trust does not work. Trust is yesterday's news. Nobody's written that book because there is no evidence out there, whether it's statistical or through management gurus, nobody out there is saying trust is dead. So if that's the case, why are we routinely destroying trust in our institutional lives and have been doing so over the last 15 years? This is a slide taken from some research carried out by an organization called Edelman. Each year, Edelman in the US carry out a global trust barometer, and they measure levels of trust around the world, 33,000 participants, 28 countries. Unfortunately, Hungary is not one of the countries that they involve in that research, but nevertheless, it's the most comprehensive research around trust levels across the world. And what Edelman has discovered over the last 17 years since it's been doing this survey is that trust levels are progressively falling away certainly in most of the Western free countries. So whether it's non-governmental organizations, business, media, or government, these are the 2016 figures, these are the 2017 figures. And the question that people are being asked in this graph is, do you trust the leaders in these organizations to do what is right? That's the sort of single question that this part of the research is asking. And the critical line in this graph is this 50% threshold. If trust falls below 50%, trust in leaders falls below 50%, the implication of that is that when I introduce myself as the boss, on average, the person in front of me says, I don't trust you. And I say, well, why don't you trust me? Because you're the boss. Now, when I first came into the workforce in 1985, trust levels being what they were then, certainly in my country, if I introduced myself as the boss, on average, the person in front of me would say, yeah, I trust you. And say, why do you trust me? Because you're the boss. So this deference to authority, this default position around, I trust you because you are the one in authority, when trust levels fall below 50%, then I don't trust you because you are the one in authority. That's why some leaders now are building brands that look very casual or informal or amateurish. Because actually they've worked out, and maybe you can think of some political leaders that I might be referring to in that regard, you know, in terms of why is Donald Trump in the White House? Donald Trump, one of the reasons he's in the White House, because he presented himself as against the establishment figures. That he presented himself as anti-authority. And he, therefore, is more likely to be seen to be one of us rather than one of them. Yep? So it's a liability to be one of them as a leader. And if you want some words just to go with these figures as a strapline, the words that I think these figures sum up are, they don't care about us. They don't care about us. So the trust crisis is that a lot of people are walking around streets of their cities going, they don't care about us, they don't care about us, they don't care about us. And who are they? Us. We're the people in this room. We're part of that. We're part of them. Because if you're a winner in that system, you tend to be associated with them, and therefore you're not trusted. So our challenge is, how do we lead in a world where we're not trusted? It's a very different challenge than leading in a world where you were given the benefit of the doubt because you were someone in authority. Yeah.
One question. Is it also because of the social media that we have much more information? So it might happen that, because we say in the past, we just have more information about these organizations.
Yes, thank you. I'll be exploring the trends that create these figures in the next stage. But one of the trends is definitely social media. That we've never lived in a time where more people have more access to more versions of the truth than ever before. And that creates the conditions for, potentially for distrust. If people find that what they've been told is not true and has not been true, that starts to unnerve and unsettle the sort of starting point around trust in leadership. And so we'll explore, what trends, social media being a big one, have actually started to undermine and cause these trust figures to drop. Now, I said that Hungary was not in the Edelman barometer, so I went to do a little bit of research to see what I could find about trust levels in Hungary. And I found this piece of, again, this is a bit of PhD research that I came across, where people were being asked to rate trust levels on a scale of 0 to 10 in different institutions. So we have the red line, trust in the European Parliament, trust in political parties, politicians, legal system, the police, United Nations. Unfortunately, there isn't a trust in business leaders. It wasn't in this group. But it just gives you a feel for a more local sort of snapshot. That we have a scale here. This is 7, but it's a scale of 1 to 10. So we're looking at trust levels in this range. 2 is the lowest score here we've got here with politicians and political parties. The highest score is this line, trust in the country's parliament. Actually, no, that's trust in the United Nations, sorry. So it just gives you a feel for how you might be benchmarking your trust. But as I say, this doesn't give us a feel about trust in business. So I'm going to show you a short video clip, just looking at some of these figures in more detail. But after that, I'm going to invite you to just talk together and think about if you were scoring the trust in your organization, in your brand, and if you were scoring your culture 0 to 10, what score would you give yourselves as a culture in your business right now? So I'm going to invite you to sort of talk about that together, and then let's just share a little bit what numbers you've come up with and why, and what might it take, to get that number from a 5 to a 7 or a 7 to a 9, and it would just give us a bit of a benchmark in terms of business trust in Hungarian context.
Right.
Yep.
The business is influencing these trends because in 2008 it was the big crash.
Yes.
And the crash itself is influencing the completely trust level.
Yes.
Regardless of the political situation. So I think we should see this point as well.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Yeah, so we noticed this dip here, and all graphs of trust will show a dip in 2008. The global financial crisis hit trust levels in a very fundamental way, in a way that probably most of us haven't fully yet realized what the repercussions of that experience was for the average person. That their world was rocked in a way that there are a lot of people who are still very angry about that, who are still reluctant to recommit and question the system that led to that. And that system that led to that was an economic system and a business-led sort of phenomenon. So certainly that's a key moment in the trust sort of cycle was the global financial crisis. And it was part of my own motivation to start the research on trust, was sensing that something had changed associated with that, but not being sure quite what had happened, but that something big had happened that would have repercussions in leadership for a long period of time. Right? I know you could say economically we've recovered to some extent, but what has been the impact on the leadership psyche? I think that's the big question. But thank you.
Do you think that there is a correlation between the trust and the rapid changing world? Because previously the foundation were very strong. There was no question that we were trusting in the foundation. Now we are trusting more on very new things which we have never experienced. For example, when Tesla launched its first car, people were buying the car without touching, without seeing the physical car itself. So we are much more trusting in the new things which are not established yet, which still have only promises rather than the old foundation.
Yeah, I think there's a thirst for to find something new that we can rely upon. And if you think about the Donald Trump phenomenon, it's like the voters getting to the point where they say, well, we know what we don't want. We don't know more of them. Who are them? Or those are the ones that we don't trust. Well, who do you want? We don't know, but we're willing to try a few different things. So let's just shake it up a bit. Let's just experiment, because we don't quite know what we want, but we're willing to gamble or vote for change or choose change in a way that historically we haven't necessarily always wanted to do that.
Almost like a protest vote, which we saw with the UK leaving. I think that was a big factor, the UK leaving the EU. Yeah,
so in our country, certainly that we would never have predicted the Brexit vote in the old world, in the old model of leadership. It just wasn't going to happen. And it has happened. So that's another moment where people in my country say, hang on, something's changing, something's going on here, and we don't quite understand it. It makes us feel uncertain, it makes us feel insecure. But also, I think for leaders, it's a time to say, great, something's going on, somebody's going to need to lead it at some point. So are we willing to step forward and say, here's my voice, here's my assessment, here's my view? Because actually, it could be an exciting time for leaders, because a lot of new things are going to need to be created in business as well as in other spheres of institutional leadership. Thank you. Any other sort of big picture questions before we just before I show you this video clip, and then just invite you to have a chat amongst yourselves about what I've shared so far?
I'm just thinking from very beginning, because what do you think how we can balance in a company which is creating a challenge culture, because it's very difficult among the internal stakeholder, and how do you build trust, and how in an environment where you are very much challenged with others?
Yeah, so the question is about how do you create trust in a rapidly changing environment, challenging business conditions.
Yeah, in a challenge culture company.
Yeah. So if we can sort of pick that up there, I think once we've got the model and the habits out there, it'd be very interesting to come back to that question, and we can look at it again in terms of which behaviours are going to be more effective or less effective when the circumstances are like that. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So let me play you this short video clip of Richard Edelman, the sponsor of this Edelman Trust Research, the Edelman Trust Barometer, talking about his interpretation of the 2017 results and why he thinks that this trust crisis is a systemic, as he calls it, a systemic issue.
Trust has imploded in 2017. You see it across all the four institutions, the special drops in media and in government, and business is teetering on the edge. Today, we're talking about a trust crisis that is causing a systemic meltdown. Only 15% of our respondents actually said that they trust the system. They don't believe any longer that they have a better future, that the rich are somehow equally treated. They don't believe in the future prospects for employment. The loss of trust in the system leads to vulnerability to economic and social fears, globalization, innovation, and fear of immigration. The consequence is populism. Institutions have to get outside of their classic box. Business as actor and innovator, government as regulator and referee, media as watchdog, and NGO as social conscience. Each of these institutions actually has to move together to help the consumer and voter understand the true consequences and implications of automation and globalization.
So that's Richard Edelman's view. He does see it at that big picture, 30,000 foot level. He sees it as a systemic issue that all of the institutions ultimately are going to have to take action around. And he uses this phrase about every institution needs to get out of its classic box. So he's basically suggesting that the game has changed and institutions need to find a new role. Each institution needs to reinvent its role in this future sort of stage. And one of those institutions is business. That business will need to get out of its classic box. Now I'll talk in the next phase about what has been the classic box of business and what might be the box that we need to get out of, and therefore what will the new box look like for business. So we'll explore that a little bit later. Because we're business people. I mean, we're not politicians, we're not people in the media. They have their own sort of questions to ask. But we have questions to ask about what is our responsibility in contributing to solving this problem. So I'd just like to give you an opportunity to talk with the person next to you or the persons next to you in twos or threes. Just share, in terms of your reaction to what I've shared so far, and in particular, I'd like you to bring it into the reality of your organization. And particularly ask this question: if you were scoring the trust levels in your culture right now on a scale of 0 to 10, what score would you give yourselves, and why? And let's just sort of use that as an opportunity to bring this into the reality of your world. And then it'd be interesting to hear from you in some of the scores that you've given and why you might have given those scores. Okay, so if we take just five minutes to discuss that, and then we'll take a bit of feedback. Thank you. So I hope that gave you an opportunity just to play with this topic a bit and to start to relate it to your world. I was having an interesting conversation with Tibor at the back of the room about his organisation and the trust challenge there. So I'm just going to invite Tibor to sort of kick us off in terms of his context and the relevance of this, and then invite 2 or 3 others just to also contribute their story. Thank you, Tibor.
No, thank you. Unfortunately, it very much resonates what you say about the trust of the bank in our organization. Why? Because I'm working for a bank, and this bank is deciding to go through a kind of towards the agile way of working, which is very trendy and fancy nowadays. The fintechs, the Netflixes, the Googles, and the Amazons, and others. But we are a bank, and the bank with like hundreds of years of kind of establishment and processes and high regulation and so on and so forth. And what I was missing, exactly the first slide showed, is like, why are we doing this? We are an international bank, so of course all these initiatives come from head office. And I didn't get the why. So conveying to my people the why is also very difficult. So of course then there is the loss of trust. There is like these 2 ways. One, like not only me but some other kind of countries who belong to this network. And it's like, since you don't get the message from head office, you can't necessarily call your people the message. So is the trust is bit of like gone or like not very solid. And the other is like people, I mean, you go from Hungary, or most of you go from Hungary, it's like those who have been with the organization for like 10, 20 years and they earn their way to manage people, losing people and losing the management responsibility, which is on paper, of course you're happy because you have to act as a leader, but you will not the direct manager of certain people, is also a kind of a loss of trust. So I earn my way and you are taking something back from me, and I have to experiment in a new way of working, but you don't tell me why and how are you going to do it. So that was it.
Thank you, Tibor. So if you were to put a number on, if you were putting a 0 to 10, and you were putting a number on the trust culture,
Trust as we speak?
Yeah.
In the organization?
Yeah.
4 or 5.
4 or 5. Okay, thank you. So, who else would like to just share their situation? Thank you.
What I see in the company I'm working for is that there are lots of changes, and there is not enough conversation. Not necessarily just about the why, but also the how and the what. But fundamentally, the big issue is being kind of management being kind of out of touch, making decisions, hiding in a sense, and then just saying, okay, this will happen, lots and lots and lots of changes, which ultimately have a goal. But even sometimes for the management, it's difficult to explain why.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let alone involve the people, and this generates kind of a cycle of mistrust.
And what sector is your organisation? Energy. And is it
Oil and gas.
Oil and gas. Is it and is it multinational? Multinational.
Small.
So I should be guessing the organisation at this point. But a multinational organisation.
Hungarian multinational.
Hungarian multinational. Okay, I'll work it out later. So, as a number, what number would you give the trust culture?
Definitely below 5.
Below 5. Okay. Is anybody sitting here with a 7 or an 8? Yeah.
I have a very high level of trust to start with, but I start with a 10.
That's you personally.
Yeah, in the organization, in the people, in the colleagues, with whoever I work. But I back it up with facts. If 1 time, 2 times, 3 times somebody fails me, then I'm very cautious.
Yes.
That's my take on trust.
Which is I think there's a quote about trust but verify. Trust but verify, which is really I start with trust, but I'm verifying it, and if it goes, then I'll change my position. And certainly the trust research would say that the leader's job is to take the risk with trust first. But obviously you're continually assessing the relationship around that. Okay, thank you. I think we had another.
Yeah, I'm working for a Swedish company, and I think in general the trust level in the society is pretty high in Sweden and in the Scandinavian countries.
Yep.
But we have a little bit of a Hungarian flavor here.
A little bit of goulash. Yeah.
But I think what is really good is that in this industry, I'm in software development. That was a big change in the last, 10, 20 years, is going towards agile. And that I think we managed to create a very different culture than what we had before, which was a very command and control. And now we are really building the whole organization on empowered teams with lots of self-initiative, self-driven teams. So I think that changed a lot. And I dare to say that we will get 7 or 8.
Yeah, great. Well, and that trust barometer I showed you, the Edelman Trust Barometer, the countries with the highest trust levels are the Scandinavian countries globally. So I mean, they have found a way around this that works, better than a lot of countries. Therefore, the businesses are going to be sucking that in and, hopefully applying that. If you were to pass on one tip to the people who are maybe at 4 or 5, what would you say is the most important tip you could pass on about how to get to a 7?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to underestimate this journey. So
right.
I see lots of, at least a couple of transfers, coming from the command and control culture to an agile culture. And it's very easy to underestimate it and very easy to fail at this. So I think it's good to prepare for a long journey with lots of reflection where we are. And you have to be very honest. Sometimes saying very nasty thing to yourself if you're still on the path.
Yes. Yeah, so don't underestimate it, and then the honesty of, the research that I did myself at Aston Business School, CEOs typically assess their own trust levels in them, what they think people trust them by, 30 to 40% higher than what they're actually trusted, which I suppose is human, is natural, but it's potentially a blind spot in terms of not realizing what might be going on in people's heads until it's too late, when you have some sort of incident. And obviously recently, I mean, every week at the moment, I'm seeing brands that walk into this trust crisis. So I don't know how widely it was covered in this country, but the Oxfam brand recently had a major trust incident. Facebook currently, right now, is right in the crosshairs of this trust crisis, and people trying to look at it and going, is Facebook part of the problem or is it part of the solution? And that if you get caught, if your brand gets caught around those sorts of questions with your consumer base, then all of a sudden you might find that the trust levels are not as high as you hope they might be. Thank you for that. Anything else from you over here? Anybody got an interesting sort of take on it?
I think
maybe you can differentiate between your own organization and, for example, the mother company. So we just heard that, and also we discussed that it's your colleagues, how they trust your micro-organization. I am from a hotel, so from the hotel industry.
Right.
How they trust the whole company, the mother company, for example. So if you ask me that what is the trust level for the company, the mother company, it's maybe around 5-ish. If you ask about the smaller organization, which is still 150 people, then maybe it's above 5. So
yeah.
And then you as a leader, you really need to face these challenges. I mean, how you keep the level of trust with your own organization on a high level, comparing. So somehow you need to balance it out, and I think this is one of the biggest challenges.
Yes, because if you've got a mother organization, a parent organization, they can very easily become them. If we're all looking for them, it's us and them, and now let's find who is them. Who is them that we don't trust? And the HQ, the parent organization, can very easily be given that role. Now, it might often deserve it, but sometimes it might not deserve it quite as much. And then as the leader, as the local leader, you have that challenge between how much do I fit in with the perceptions that my own people have that they can't be trusted? And how much do I challenge that perception so that, we don't create too big a gap, and I think that is a dilemma. Who am I trying to build trust with, and who are those stakeholders, and what is the trust that I have with each party, and the why. I mean, we talked about the why. The why is critical, I think, in those situations, to try and avoid the us and them becoming too divisive. A strong why is really part of that, and we'll come back to that in terms of the habits of trust and why that's particularly important. Thank you. Okay, so that's just giving us a chance to sort of bring it into your reality, your cultural context, but hopefully, you can see that this is out there. You have to sort of assess it for yourselves in your organisation, in your sector. But if you believe that this is a factor, then the question for you is, how can we shine brighter in that dark room? If the room is getting dark in terms of trust, how can we actually buck the trend and actually differentiate ourselves? Use trust as a differentiator, as a competitive advantage, which a lot of brands are doing. But I also think leaders can do this as well in terms of their leadership styles, that to differentiate that and therefore attract talent and generate customer loyalty. So I'm going to move on from this stage of the journey. Maybe just take one question.
Question that, do you think we can increase trust level by involving your colleagues? Because if they are feeling the involvement, they understand more what we are doing and how we are doing.
Yeah, so the question is, can we increase trust levels by involving our colleagues? And certainly, one of the habits that we'll look at later is being open. And being open is one of the most critical habits, transparency. And that requires people to be involved to a much greater degree in understanding the why, the what, the how. Because, again, the younger generation are even more needy, I was going to say. I'm not saying this is a negative thing, but I think they're even more needy in terms of needing to know the answers to those questions before they're willing to commit. Because they've grown up in this world and they're going, why should I bother about your why? Now, when I came in, and this is just gives me a lead into the next stage of the journey, because when I came into the workforce, 1985, I joined an organisation called British Gas in the UK. And when I walked in through the doors of British Gas on that first day as a graduate trainee, I wasn't wanting to know the why. It was just, tell me what to do, tell me when to do it, give me a pay slip at the end of the month, and that's the deal. And sometimes now when people, I want to know the why, and you're thinking, oh my goodness, is it really that complicated? But that's the reality now. People do want to know it, and if you don't provide it, it's now a missing piece in their engagement and their commitment. Whereas back then, in this world that I'm going to describe, we didn't need to worry about that. Because what I'm going to give you is a very simplified view. There are academics who would spend a week talking about this topic that I'm going to share with you now, but I'm going to simplify it to make a point, really. But this is what I'm talking about as the traditional box of business. So when Richard Edelman talks about we all need to get out of our box, this is the box that I think he's inviting us to get out of his business. So I walk into British Gas in 1985. I've got a degree in chemistry, and they put me in the marketing department because really all they wanted to know was, did I have a brain? You know, did I have this particular sacred pillar of intellectual ability? Emotional intelligence had not been invented in 1985, right? So it's just, do you have a brain, right? Tick. And then it's, I tell you what, you've got a brain, we can give you a job title. And my first job title was customer service officer. I was very proud of that job title. So we're going to give you a job title, authority, and then you can use our job title and your brain in service of the God of profit. Yep. So this is the temple of business that, as I knew it, that I walked into. And this is a temple built by 19th century economists. They were the architects of this model. And we worship in that temple. And of course, me at that age, it's the only game in town. I mean, I don't know that there's anything different. I don't even question. I don't even know what the model is, but I sort of learn the rules pretty quickly because that's what you do. And if it's the only game in town, you play the game as best you can. So for me, you know, I optimized as best I could in this world of business. So I have worshipped to this temple, and I'm not saying it's evil or bad or wrong, but what I am inviting you to explore is it still fit for purpose? Is it still fit for purpose given some of the trends that are happening? Because one of the suggestions about that model is that it's under threat and that it is potentially collapsing. Now, it's collapsing in different countries and in different sectors at different rates. But there's one word that is the lightning bolt around this model, is this word of transparency. So we are now living in a world where nothing can be hidden. So the comment we had earlier about social media, if we think about the major trends of the last 10, 15 years, we've had social media, globalization, diversity, Generation Y, millennials. So all of those trends together are combining to create a more transparent world in which people ask questions and they get many, many different answers, and they can go to many, many different places for many, many different answers. That creates transparency. And one of the quotes about transparency that I like is from a researcher in University of Rome, Fiammetta Borgia. She says about transparency is destroying the opaque lives of organizations. The more we know, the more we want to know, and the more there seems to be to disclose. So it's a feverish atmosphere around transparency. We are gorging ourselves on transparency. We are digging and we are digging and we are digging until we prove that you are one of them and you cannot be trusted. And we will make it our job to prove that, because we've decided that that's how it is. Therefore, our job is to find the data to support the view that we've made. And transparency gives all of us that opportunity to do it. And then it starts to impact, as we saw in those earlier figures, it impacts on this pillar of authority. And the pillar of authority is cracking, but it's cracking in different ways, in different places, at different times. The other point about the temple is this word profit as the god of business. So Peter Drucker, back in 1952, he said about profit, profit for a business is like oxygen for a human being. But we all need oxygen to live, but if you think the purpose of your life is oxygen, you're probably missing a trick. and if you think the purpose of your business is profit, you're probably missing a trick. And a lot of people now in this questioning world around the why, a lot of people are questioning whether that is a sufficient why. Is it a sufficient why for business as a whole? And if it isn't, what is going to replace it? And we'll explore that when we look at what might be coming as a replacement for that model. Now, if you want an example of transparency in action and the business impact of transparency and how quickly a brand can be caught out because it thought it was playing in the old world, but the new world of transparency came along and there was a bolt of lightning. How many of you a year ago saw the video of the customer, David Dow, who was escorted from the overbooked United Airlines flight? Yep. So some of you saw that. So we had an incident, an overbooked United Airlines flight in the US, and a customer was escorted off the overbooked flight. And Oscar Munoz was the CEO of United Airlines at that time, and his first comment, public comment about that incident was that David Dow was being difficult and belligerent. Yeah, difficult and belligerent. Now, when he said that word, he's living in this world, right? And he's basically saying, I'm the one in authority. And one of the interesting things about being in authority is I get to tell the story. I get to tell what the truth is. And it's tempting, isn't it, when you're in authority, to tell the truth in a way that serves your own purpose. I mean, it's sort of a human temptation, isn't it? I mean, it happens. Now, the problem in a transparent world is that he says that statement as someone in authority, and then a video is released, because at the moment David Dow is being escorted off the United Airlines flight, there are 5 or 6 iPhones filming the incident. And what we see on the film with our own eyes is David Dow with blood coming from his chin, being dragged down the aisle of the plane with his head bouncing between the seats, and with a load of people in the background shouting, "Stop, stop, no." And we're thinking, difficult and belligerent. You know, the video goes viral. It's watched 200 million times in the next 48 hours in China. China is the biggest market for United Airlines. The share price fell 8% across 48 hours. And Oscar Munoz, the CEO, decided that David Dow was not being difficult and belligerent after all, but this should never have happened, and we will review our processes and procedures accordingly. But we've all seen it. We've all seen it, haven't we, by then? We've all seen that, unfortunately, we saw that model and we were trusting in someone in authority, and transparency revealed something different, because we've all got iPhones and we can all go and watch the video. Whenever a leader in authority does anything like that, trust takes another hit. Because what everybody thinks is, well, if that happened, and that was just a passenger being escorted from a flight, what else? What else have I been told that might not have been as true as I thought it was? And it's that paranoia or cynicism that creates then, you know, this sort of outcome collectively. How many of you have seen the film The Matrix? Is it a popular film? Yeah, great. It's popular all around the world. It's great. I can use it wherever I go. And why is it so popular? It's partly because of the great special effects and the martial arts and everything else. But I also think it's popular because it contains a very powerful parable. A very powerful parable, which I think speaks to a lot of what we've talked about so far this morning. And I want to use this metaphor that in the Matrix, that they have this metaphor about the red pill and the blue pill. And I want to use that in the rest of the workshop. So I just want to introduce you to it. And I'm going to show you a short clip from the Matrix where this metaphor is introduced. So for those of you who haven't seen the film, I'm just going to give you a bit of an introduction to the clip, and then we'll watch the clip and see what happens. But in the film, the hero of the film is a guy called Neo. And Neo is living in a world that he thought was real. He thinks it's the truth. But he starts to notice that weird things start happening, and he gets glimpses of things that might not be quite as they are. Now, for better or for worse, on his journey, he meets a leadership mentor, a guy called Morpheus. And in the clip that we show you, Morpheus is the one with the mirrored glasses and the big long leather coat. Now, the problem when you meet a leadership mentor is that sometimes they open your eyes. And when you've had your eyes opened, it's hard to close them again. And Morpheus starts to have a conversation with Neo about what he calls the matrix, the old model, the system that Neo is living in, and starts to invite him to think about, actually, is it as real as you think, and might there be other ways of looking at things? And would you be willing, if you had the choice, to look at things in a different way? And that's a little bit what we're doing today. So I haven't got the mirrored glasses on, and I haven't got the leather trench coat, and I don't pretend to be Morpheus, but it's about, what I am doing is inviting you to think about things and look at things maybe in a slightly different way. And we're going to see a conversation now between Morpheus and Neo. And to me, it's a coaching conversation. Really, Morpheus is coaching Neo. And ultimately, he coaches him to the point where he says, you need to make a choice. You can either keep living in that old world and think that it's real and it's going to last forever, or if you think it's going and something different's coming, you can choose to go to something different. And he presents that choice ultimately as a choice between two pills, either taking the blue pill to stay where he is or taking the red pill to go somewhere different. So let's watch the clip, and then I'll just put it into a bit more context for today.
Do you want to know what it is? The matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room, you can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Is the truth, nothing more. Follow me.
Oh, I love The Matrix. Shame we can't watch a little bit more. But I showed that video about 15 months ago in the UK with a similar group, and at the break, one of the group came up to me and said, "John, you know what you need at that point in the session?" They said, "You need 2 jelly beans. You need a blue jelly bean, and you need a red jelly bean, and you need to stand in front of the group and say, 'I'm offering you a choice.' You can either keep taking the blue one, keep living in that world, that temple to profit, keep trusting in power. Good luck. It's a choice. Or you can take the red one and seek something different. But actually, at the moment, I'm not telling you what it is. That's why it needs courage. Because actually, you don't know, do you? You might know what's going, and you might think, I'm not very happy with that. I can see the cracks. I don't really believe in it anymore. It's not a sufficient why. But I don't quite know what it is that would be replacing it or being different. But leaders, you see, this thing about leaders anticipate. If you're a leader, there's a point where you get to where you say, okay, I'll take that one, even though I don't quite know where it's leading. Because that's what leaders do. They create new things. But the important thing to state that is it's an invitational model. It's an invitational model. You see, if I forced you to take the red one, I'm actually using that word, aren't I? So it doesn't work. I'm using authority and power to say, you should have this one. You have it now. If you don't, I'm going to punish you. It's got to be an invitational model. And some of you, you might say, look, John, this is all very well, it's quite interesting, entertaining, but in my business right now and in my sector, I actually think the blue one works. And I think it's going to work for as long as I need it to, because I might be retiring in 5 years' time, so it'll work for that long. And if you decide to do that, if that's your calculation, great. Or you might be saying, no, I think the collision is coming quicker than most people think. I use that word collision. Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, said that to be a benevolent organization, you need to make a lot of profit. But if your sole purpose is profit, you're on a collision course with time. And personally, I think there is a collision course on that or model, but I don't know when it's going to happen in a particular country or sector or company. But your job as a leader is at least to think about that and make a choice. Make a conscious choice. And if you make a conscious choice to take that one and you can justify it to yourself and to those around you, great. I'm not here to sort of judge that. But some of you might also say, actually, no, on balance, I haven't thought about it. I know there's risks involved, but I think the risks here are lower than the risks there. So on a risk management basis, I'm willing to try it. And then I will judge it by the results. So when that boss of mine said to me, John, you're too effing nice, I could have said, yeah, that's right, I am, and that's wrong. So I will change and I will fit in. Or I could say, that's actually given me a motivation to actually want to try and demonstrate to myself, if not to anybody else, that there is a way of doing this by relying on the power of trust, not trusting in power. And I can stand here and say, there was some success in that, but I could have failed. And if I'd have failed, I might not even have been stood here, might I know? So I'm not guaranteeing that. I'm just saying it's possible. There are risks every which way you look in leadership. But at least I think taking that one, you might sleep better at night, which is a bonus in the game. Any thoughts, questions, challenges?
I've got a challenge.
A challenge, great.
You mentioned Facebook. That Facebook
yeah.
Through a crisis of trust.
Yep.
In fact, it seems like it's not really hurting it. So at least on the short term. So what's driving that?
Yeah. How are you measuring? Whether it's hurting Facebook?
Well, membership is up, as I heard. Stock price didn't really, it suffered a little bit.
Yeah, I think
it's back.
I think the stock price is still suffering. Membership certainly hasn't suffered. So it's a good question, and I've been asked that question also about Volkswagen. What happened to Volkswagen? They had this big crisis, but they appear to have largely come back from that. So one of the ways I've heard that discussed is that it's like giving a yellow card. It's like giving a yellow card to the brand, that there's a sort of warning been issued. But there is an opportunity to say, okay, there's a warning, but let's see what happens next. But for example, with Volkswagen, if Volkswagen or Facebook took another hit, at what point does the brand sort of fold in on itself? Now again, that's a judgment call, isn't it? I might be wrong. They might be able to do it every day of the week and they're going to be just as successful. But given the level of media coverage and investor scrutiny that's generated by these incidents, that is telling us something. That people think this is important. It's making the news. The point at which that translates into toxic brand collapse of business results, again, that's an assessment and it's a risk analysis sort of view. You know, so if in Facebook, after that incident, right, Mark Zuckerberg, after appearing in front of the Senate committee in the US and being grilled left, right and center, which I imagine for him was quite an interesting experience, he's either going to come out of that going, stuffed a lot of you, I don't think it's going to change, I'm carrying on doing exactly what I'm doing, and I think you're all basically going to continue to suck up my products for, you know, as long as you need them. Or he's come out of it thinking, hang on a minute, I haven't been in front of the US Senate before, I haven't been asked questions like that before, something's different. And my job is to keep anticipating, in the same way I anticipated the demand for his product, to anticipate how, you know, the brand is protected. The other interesting brand is Uber. We'll talk about Uber a bit later when we get into this model, where again there's been incidents around that brand and repercussions of that and changes. So it's, you know, it's not guaranteed that you will collapse the first time you have a problem, but I think we can see that it certainly generates a lot of attention. Does that help?
I mean, I have kind of a hypothesis.
Yeah, great.
Is that there is an addiction, the world is kind of addicted to social media.
Yes.
And Facebook is in a very privileged position.
Yeah.
It's almost a kind of like natural monopoly in a sense.
Yes, and of course, and so the addiction is to social media, not to Facebook.
But what is the alternative?
Well, what is the alternative? There isn't one right now, but of course somebody in the face of that crisis, some entrepreneur somewhere in some country somewhere might be going, hey, I see an opportunity. I could create a higher trust version of Facebook, and I could launch that, and I could be very, very successful launching that. So we don't know, but somebody out there might have gone, there's an opportunity here, because Facebook is beginning to block its copy. But the other impact that you mentioned there is regulation. That unless businesses voluntarily choose to take the red one and move to a more trustworthy position, what happens? They get regulated, and the monopoly gets broken up, and regulation and legislation is used as a surrogate for trust. But unfortunately, legislation and regulation slows business down. It slows everything down. So it's actually a very poor substitute for trust. But it is the lever that the politicians will pull if business doesn't sort itself out. Yeah?
Generally, you mentioned not Facebook, but generally social media. My problem is that the social media is not really socialized yet. From beginning from Gutenberg, from the first printed book, I think how much is 200 years or more. The people is very deep this trust for a printed book for the general population.
Here's one.
And coming is trust what is written and printed and trusted.
Yes.
I believe it.
Yes.
And is now transferred somehow, not generally, but I think 70-80% globally to the social media. It is written as well, not printed, but I have on the screen. And in that way, 100% what is true, what is not true. How much the people are ready to question mark because it could be a big problem. A lot of how large is the percentage of misleading information?
Yes.
And
Yep.
It should be not only regulated,
Yep.
but somehow the people socialized that it is not necessarily everything is true.
Yeah, which is then this whole phenomenon of fake news. Pardon?
Just you were talking about also Facebook as an alternative and about this new topic. I'm from IT and kind of this sphere is close to me. So right now I would say Facebook is not really already popular. Instagram, it's much more popular. And there we don't have text. Nobody is reading anything. It's about emotional touch. And it's not really, I would say right now, is about like read and trust. It's already what emotion you get while like seeing it. So it's not really about already conscious something. It's about like instant. That's about instant messages, instant view of something.
Yep.
Just scrolling. And then you get some kind of emotion. And that's how this emotion impacts everything else. So I would say trust here is not really conscious already. So it's about which emotion you get, that's what will lead you afterwards.
Yes, which is a little bit about addiction, and that you're seeking the fix of that emotion, and you go and find whatever it is that gives you that emotion. But it's emotional. It's an emotional thing, not a verified, trusted source. It's of information. It might be a trusted source of an emotional hit, but not a source of verifiable information. So this is where the media has got a huge part to play in this role. I mean, we had this incident last week, didn't we, with in Ukraine, where we had the guy. I don't know again how it was reported, but we have a guy apparently assassinated, which is reported by all the media sources, including in our country like the BBC, which is a quite high trust brand, reports that this individual is being killed. And the day after, has to report that actually no, it didn't happen. It was staged, and it was staged. But not only was it staged, it was publicised as a real incident. And then 24 hours later, we get the alternative view. And again, people go, okay, so how many other things that I read in the BBC last week didn't really happen? So. The media aspect of this is massive in terms of their responsibility, their sort of response to it. But we're primarily in that business box in terms of, okay, they're going to need to do something different over time, but what are we going to do as business people, as our part of the challenge of restoring trust? Yep.
It might was mentioned before. I'm not sure I can do it later, so sorry for the case. If you talk about the company culture, trust is it's authority or trust. So which one you choose? How you told it's another choice. It's a choice for every person if they go with this one or with the other one.
Yep.
How you implement trust in a company culture, how this change will through in a company?
That's very much where I'm going to go next, because if you choose to take the red one, and I hope that we're going to have a break shortly. I hope that you come back, because that'll probably give me some confidence that you're at least willing to experiment with that one. If you're absolutely committed to that and you're thinking this guy is just like this is ideological nonsense, then the rest of the session might not be as relevant. But if you've got a question like you've got, which is okay, I'm curious, tell me a bit more. How could I do this? That's where we're going to go after the break. So in the clip there, at the end of it, he takes the pill, and then Morpheus says the last thing he says to him is, "Follow me." Right, follow me. Now, Neo at that point doesn't know where we're going, but he's decided that he's curious enough to take the risk. And so that's that point really, is you need to be curious to then go on this next stage of the journey and say, okay, if I did do that, how could I get this to happen in my leadership and in my culture? And that's where models become useful, because they're ways of talking about things, ways of breaking big things down into little things, ways of measuring things, and therefore it gives us a tool to make this happen. But what we need before we have the tool, we need the motivation, we need the why, because this isn't going to be easy in a lot of situations. So you need to have the motivation and the drive to say, yeah, I'm going for this is my why, and I'm going to throw myself into trying to make this happen for my people and my customers. Yeah. Any other questions before we, Nandi, in terms of the break, it's 20 to 11.
Yeah.
I think you talked about 11. Is it okay if we break a bit earlier?
It's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna have a break in a moment. But any questions before we break? We're basically, in terms of the journey, we're here. So when I'm going to go after the break, I'm going to start talking about, I'm assuming that you're willing to take the red one. And we're going to look at, well, okay, how do I do this? So I'm going to move on from the why to the how. And then this is more the what. So if you've got any questions, particularly about this what we've done up till now, please sort of throw them in now, because we'll be moving on, let's say, to a different part of it after the break. Yep.
Still on the crisis level.
Yep.
We have very good examples when transparency really kills authority and we have the problem around. But do you have good examples when transparency, trust builds something new, global, something visible, on the level as we have seen failures in some other cases?
Yeah. So I do, and I'll talk about a case study of that after the break. So the company I'll talk about after the break is Unilever. I don't know if we've got anybody. I don't think we've got anybody here from Unilever, but I'm going to talk about Unilever after the break, and Paul Polman, the CEO of Unilever, as an example of a brand that has decided to plant its flag in this place, and I'll give you the evidence of the success of that so far. I mean, it could all change tomorrow, but I can give you the evidence of it so far. Yep. Any other questions before we take a break? Maybe just leave you with this slide, which is taken from that same trust research that I talked about earlier, the Edelman Trust Barometer. And if you're interested in getting more data around this, if you Google Edelman Trust Barometer, there's stacks of great material around that survey. So the reason I'm sharing with you now is that red pill, blue pill choice, right? That you have that choice, you're making that choice, but also all of your stakeholders are making that choice as well. They're deciding which world they want to live in. Now this slide shows you the question that people were asked in this survey at this point were, do you believe the system is working, is still working, the matrix? So it's basically saying, do you still believe in the matrix? Now, the mustard-coloured countries are all the countries where over 50% of the population have said, I don't think it's working anymore. So in other words, and if you look at the US, so the US, what figure? 57%. 57% are there. So what I'm suggesting there is that 50-70% of the population there are saying, I used to take the blue pill because I used to think the system was working. But I'm going to take the red one. And that's why I voted for Donald Trump. And people then say, well, why did you vote for him? What's the rationale? It doesn't matter. I don't have a rationale. I just know that things need to change. It's a protest vote, as Chris said earlier. Protest votes don't need a justification about the future. They just need a dissatisfaction about the past. And we can see that these countries, this is a first world Western democratic problem. This is a luxury problem for those countries that have arrived at this point in the cycle where we have a choice. Because if you're in a different part of the world where enough people still believe in that old model and they still believe in the blue pill, as long as enough people believe in it, it sort of works. It sort of works as long as enough people believe in it. You might judge it and say, well, is it morally the best thing that could happen? But if enough people believe in it, it can work. The problem comes when not enough people believe in it anymore, when there aren't enough believers. And these countries don't have enough believers anymore. And that's why we have weird things happening in leadership in those countries, because there is a thirst for something different. So these people who are making this choice are looking for new leaders. And new leaders will emerge because that's the way it works. The question is just how long will it take, and whether you in this room are part of that or not part of it. You know, we have this thing about disruption, you know, that there are many sectors being disrupted because there are new organizations emerging that disrupt the current sort of model. And this is the same thing about leadership, that we're talking about leaders emerging that are disrupting a model. And you know, you either think, yeah, great, I like disruption, it's exciting, it's interesting, it's challenging, or no, I don't like disruption, it makes me feel insecure, it makes me feel frightened. You know, so it creates these different tensions that are playing out in the institutional lives of these countries. Now, Sweden, we had Sweden. Look at Sweden there, 55. So actually, of the Western developed economies, one of the highest, in fact, yeah, the highest trust level, but still 55. So, even if you don't choose to take the red one, you've got to then ask yourselves the question, what is the colour of the pill that people are taking around you? How many of your staff have started taking the red one? How many of your customers have started taking it? Because they've got a choice as well. Sometimes they choose to exercise it. So this is the dialogue between the leader and the follower. Where are you? Where am I? Who's going first? You know, that's how things develop through the cycle. So, we're going to have a break. We're going to have half an hour.